Okay, I'll be quiet.
Okay. So we are live. We are live.
Okay,
So welcome, Dr. Curt Carlson, to You've Got Mel.
I've got Mel, or I'm Curt. That's terrific.
Okay. So you've got Mel. The next 40 minutes, I'm all yours.
Wow.
You can talk about whatever you like, except politics. And we start out with a jingle. We have to
Oh,
have
we
the
do.
jingle.
Okay, let's
It's
hear
it's
it.
like it's a Jewish tradition, you know.
Yep,
Always start a video cast with a jingle.
I believe it.
You gotta believe it.
Off your feet, we move,
One
we
second
groove.
from the beginning.
Get a chair, grab a seat, or we'll sweep you off your feet. We move, we groove, you got Mel. Ease your legs, rest a while, all you gotta do is smile. We're swell, can't you tell, you got Mel. When the show begins, you better hold on real tight, or before you know it, you'll be high as a kite. Take a break, settle down, we're the only show in town. SRO, don't you know, you got Mel. Give it up, don't think twice, we're a hurricane on ice. What the hell, give a yell, ring your bell, show and tell. Mademoiselle, give a smell, you got Mel. You've got
And
Mel.
Mel has Curt Carlson.
Wow.
Curt, thank you. Thank you for waking up so early to be on the show.
Yeah, it's 6 o'clock here.
So you're somewhere near Menlo Park. Where are you?
Yeah, I'm right next to Stanford University, which is right next to Menlo Park in Palo Alto. So basically in the epicenter of Silicon Valley. That's where I am. Perfect spot.
The center of the universe.
Of a certain kind of universe. It is the center. You know, it is a special place. And people ask me all the time, what do I really appreciate about the other places I've worked over the world? And it's the intensity of the networking. You know, it's really all about innovation here. So every meeting you have is a little bit like what we're doing right now. Is we're talking about the world and how to make it better and innovation and it's more intense here because basically it's the only thing we do. So it's really a special place that way. It is an epicenter for networking about innovation.
So are you guys like us Israelis? You spend a lot of time kibitzing in coffee houses?
Well, we occasionally agree on something. You know, if you're Israeli, you never agree on anything.
I don't agree with that at all.
Exactly. That's my point, right? I mean, I remember once we had a young Israeli guy who was working for me, and so I'm a vice president, and he's a brand new employee. And he would never agree with anything I said. So his name was Shmuel Peleg, a brilliant guy, He went back to Israel, by the way. Anyway, so one day I'm talking to Shmuel, and he says something. We're talking about computer vision technology. So he says something, I write it on the board. He says something, I write it on the board. He says something, I write it on the board. And I say, let's stop Shmuel for a second. Now we agree on these 3 points, right? He looks at the board and he goes, no. I said, but Shmuel, you just said these, 10 seconds ago. He said, it's different now. It's different now. So
it's Shmuel's uncertainty principle.
It's exactly right. He deserves that. I mean, he really is living up to the tradition of never agreeing to somebody else about anything. So, but so the positive side of that, is that kind of intense questioning is really at the foundation of innovation. It's asking those questions over and over and again and being demanding about getting the answers. That's it's one of the great things about the Jewish tradition. I mean, it comes out of the the religious experience when you're a kid studying the Talmud. This working with a buddy and questioning and questioning and questioning. And I think that's, what a great beginning of an education if you want to become a scientist or, an innovator of any type, not just a scientist. This sense of, the rabbi would compliment you if you asked a good question, right? Because if you ask the wrong question, you're going the wrong way, right?
Yeah, the rabbi would beat the shit out of you for asking the wrong question.
Exactly. But if you ask the right question, you've taken the first huge step. in the right direction to do something of significance. And those lessons, I think, really are fundamental, really important.
But I think that asking the wrong questions are more important than asking the right ones. But we'll get back to that. So
Okay.
Curt, for Curt Carlson, it doesn't sound like a Jewish name, and you know all this thing about Jews and Israelis, right? What's going on?
I know it's my field, right? What can I do? What can I do? And my best friend happens to be Jewish too. His name is Norman Winarski. Norman and I have been buddies, and a lot of what we did in my life is because of that partnership with Norman. And Norman has made me an honorary Jew. He has decided that I can be an honorary Jew. So just so you know, even though I'm 10,000 miles away from you, I kind of fit in there.
So some part of you is in the Holy Land.
I think so, one way or another, for sure.
Siri is now bugging me.
Oh, wow.
She knows that I'm interviewing you.
She probably does.
I asked her, I said, who's Curt Carlson for you? And she says, Mel, you're interviewing him in an hour. Why don't you ask him? So what is Siri for you, Curt Carlson?
What is, I said that again, Mel? What is
Siri for you?
Well, Siri for me, my career would start out with a big company, RCA, and they gave me millions of dollars to spend. And I was really good at spending millions of dollars. Mel, I was a pro. I was a typical big company pro. And I thought I was really special, because they gave me this nice office and all these great people to work with and all this money. I didn't have a clue. I was like, I was a danger to humanity back then. Because big companies don't teach you how to create value. And one day, GE bought us, and I was in GE for a couple of years. I got to know Jack Welch and all those guys. Interesting experience. And then we were bought by SRI International, which is how, it's the headquarters is out here in Silicon Valley. And my friend Norman came in, and I asked him what he thought of it. He said, well, the technical guys think it's going to be a great thing. They respect SRI a lot. It's a very famous place. And, they invented the computer mouse and electronic banking. There's a long list of, really big things that came out of it. I said, well, that's swell, Norman, but they used to give us millions of dollars to spend, but now I think they expect us to earn millions of dollars. And I have this feeling that it's going to be different. And Norman said the magic words, okay? No, by the way, Norman's a really smart guy. I mean, he graduated 2 years early at the University of Chicago in pure math, above a Nobel Prize winner, and then went to the institute where Einstein used to work. Anyway, he's a super smart guy. So Norman says to me, Curt, it's just like everything else we've ever done. We just have to learn. And those words changed my life. We have to learn. And we realized, we thought of innovation and value creation then as something we just had to learn. And then we said to each other, how are we going to do this? And we set up a method, which we can talk about. I'll stop this, but to learn. And it took us several years, but eventually we figured it out. I mean, to the extent that you can figure out something as vague as value creation. But we became very successful, and all the things I failed at working for RCA with all the money in the world and great people and prestige, and we made basically everything I wanted to do has happened since. This trophy over here is Emmy, the team won, not me, the team. I mean, I was part of the team. I was a big team. The team won for high definition television. We won 2 Emmys. I helped create 20 companies. We did Siri. We did all this stuff. So Siri is part of this portfolio of things that seemed impossible when I worked for RCA, that I learned by working in a completely different way, that kind of ordinary people, if they work in the right way with the right support, can literally change the world. So, when we created that company, it took us years to create. By the way, all these things take years to do. I mean, they're all a decade. Think a decade for everything, right? And I'm sure you'd agree with that. I'm sure everything you've done is significant.
I don't agree again. Do
You
you
got
have
to do it again.
do you have a blackboard? No, because the only invention that I'm known for
Yeah.
took 35 years. So sometimes a decade isn't even enough.
Yeah, well, that's true. And actually, that took 15 years. Siri took at least 15 years.
Mhm.
Intuitive Surgical, which is now an $80 billion company that we helped form, probably took 20. No, it's really interesting. You know, and you look at companies like Alibaba and you listen to Jack Ma, and how long did it take him? You know, it looks like he was an instant success, right? No, he was in the desert roaming around for a decade before he figured out how to put the pieces of the puzzle together, right? So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. No, people don't realize that. And um, you've got to stick around. I mean, the people who win are the ones who, you know, stick around, put the teams together, and do the right stuff. And but you've got to. There's ways though to speed that up, which is what we learned how to do, and we learned how to spend small amounts of money before we started to scale up in a serious way. For example, with Siri, there's funny stories with that, but we actually had that technology for several years before we formed the company. And the reason was because we didn't have a business model. So if we didn't, you know, if we spun it out and, we, you know, like a lot of companies think, oh, we'll figure it out when we're out there. Well, you know, it's like going to war. We'll get the ammunition when we're out there. I don't think so. That's not a good idea. So we incubated it. We didn't spend much money. Norman was a big part of that team, my buddy Norman. At that point, he became the head of our ventures group eventually. We have another lab in Princeton, just to make this story straight. So Norman and I were working in Princeton, and then we started to be successful, and then they made me CEO of the whole company out here. Anyway, we had that technology for several years, but we didn't have a business model, and we weren't spending much money. But eventually, we figured out a business model, and only then did we hire the team. So here's another big mistake, right? You form the company too soon with the wrong business model. You hire the wrong people, then you have to change the management. And at this point, if you're a new company, Mel, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble.
Well, that's good news for me because my startup doesn't have a business model.
Okay, good for you.
I feel much better now.
Okay, magic. So you're not only do you create little musical songs for your intro, this is brilliant. This is really impressive. You can function without a business model. Tremendous. But you're the only person I've ever met, Mel, that can do this. Just so you know.
I've been doing it for years. But this interview is about you, Curt. So so I'm interested in Siri. Like before the program, you told me that you love Jewish people.
I do.
But Siri isn't Jewish. She doesn't have any. She doesn't have any. Her humor is not Jewish humor, and I was kind of thinking.
No.
I was going to ask you about that.
Well,
she's funny, but she's funny in a non-Jewish way.
I know it's a real problem. So here's the deal, though. So the CEO we hired to form Siri, Doug Kikos, Dag Kikos. Dag is Norwegian. So Siri means warrior woman who leads you into victory. That's what Siri means. So kind of a good.
Listen, you could say anything, you know.
That's a good name.
It could mean she who must be obeyed.
Exactly.
So Siri is your baby. You can say whatever you like, right?
Well, I actually like your idea. I think having a Jewish mother version of Siri would be very, very effective. Very effective. Yeah. Well, maybe Apple now will change their mind about that and put a little attitude behind the Siri voice. I, for one, would love it. You know, I would love it.
So what I want to know is, so we've established that you're a remarkable person, and we're going to talk about Carlson's law. Ooh. because not everybody has a law named after them.
Yeah, that's true.
Some sheriffs, the odd president, and you. And you've worked with presidents, but I
Yeah.
want to go back to your childhood, the stuff
Ooh.
that isn't written in Wikipedia. What
Ooh.
kind of, were you a renegade kid? How did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in a great family. We lived in an industrial park. Our front yard was about 10 feet deep, and then it was all tar. And there's a brewery across that, and it was the loading dock for the brewery. So there were, imagine 15 big semis running their engines 24 hours a day. That was our front yard. And the street behind us was a turnpike. That's where I grew up.
Where was this?
That was in Rhode Island, the border of, well, it doesn't matter where it was, but it was in Rhode Island. That's a small place.
No, it matters to me. If it's near Newport, it matters.
It was not new. No. That's a different. You're in a different part of the world. Newport could have been a million miles away from where I grew up.
No, because that's what I'm thinking. Like, I'm thinking, where in Newport would you fit a brewery with tar? And
You wouldn't. You put this into kind of a rundown part of town. Yeah.
you were in the wrong side of the island.
Yeah. So this.
But it was good.
It was okay. I mean, it's where you grew up. The wonderful thing is our parents basically were loving people. They loved each other. They loved us. They were devoted to the whole family and friends. So all those traditions were there. And they gave me the opportunity. I never wanted to be home. I was very much a kid who wanted to do things. So I was constantly building things. It didn't matter what it was. I wanted to build it. I built kayaks. I built, you name it, all kinds of electrical stuff. I was always building stuff. And the thing that changed my life was my grandfather, who was a professional violinist, a very good professional violinist.
And not Jewish.
No, he's Swedish. I do have a Swedish name, actually. So that's the thing, right? So
I mean, you could have been Cohen and changed it to Carlson so people would think you're Swedish.
I could have, but I don't think I'd pass. I don't think so. No one. So
Back to your grandfather.
Yeah. So my grandfather was really good. I love my grandfather, and he taught me the violin. And fortunately, I turned out to be pretty good. So I took it seriously. I almost became a professional violinist. I actually was a professional violinist at 15. I was the youngest member ever of the Rhode Island Philharmonic at 15 years of age. It got me out of that part of the town that I grew up in with. And instead of, kids basically who weren't probably going to go to college, that's for sure. All of a sudden now I'm hanging around with kids who are all motivated. They're passionate about what they're doing. We have music in common. A lot of Jewish kids, as you can imagine, playing musical instruments. Are you shocked? And
why should I be shocked?
There you go. Exactly. Right. I figured that. Yeah. So that changed my life. Because I was a professional when I was in high school, I discovered I was not quite good enough to do it professionally. I was good enough. I was a very good amateur. I mean, among amateurs, I would be considered to be about as good as you.
Professional among the amateurs.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was. But to go from that to Yo-Yo Ma or Perlman or, forget Heifetz. I mean, Heifetz is a god, right? I realized that was a reach way too far. And fortunately, I had this other side of me that, the science side, I was intensely curious. I've always been curious. And so I went that way and it turned out to be the right thing. But all the crazy things I did, by the way, see that trophy there, see that one with the globe? I was behind me there.
Okay, all right.
That I actually was also, when I was 15, that was my magic year. I was became a professional violinist, and I won the Rhode Island Soapbox Derby. Projects. I love projects.
Yeah, well,
Projects.
where's your violin? You still play it?
Oh, that's a story. I broke my collarbone in a really bad way, and I can't play anymore. Yeah, that's the other thing, Mel. If you're a musician, you're an athlete, right? I mean, you got to have the musical ability, but you also, if anything happens to you physically, that's the end of it. And unfortunately, when I came out here, I was coming off a red eye. I was working when I came out to SRI. The place had been failing for 20 years. It was basically bankrupt. Everybody hated each other because that's what it's like when you're failing for 20 years. And we had developed with my buddy Norman, we had developed this methodology for value creation. And I thought if we could make it work out here, we could turn the place around because it is a famous place and it was full of really smart people. That wasn't the problem. It was just they were working in this very inefficient way. Anyway, but when I came out here, it was totally broken. I mean, no, it was, the buildings were falling down. They were selling off the land. It was just terrible. And the worst thing was everybody basically hated each other because when you're failing,
But isn't it associated with Stanford somehow?
It was formed by Stanford, but now it's an independent organization, although we still have ties to Stanford, intellectually.
So it was like not doing well, and you revived it.
Yeah, the business model was basically kind of a university model, which was very effective 20 years before I got there. Became obsolete. You can't work that way anymore. I mean, all the big things in the world today are multidisciplinary or really interdisciplinary. And so you have to put teams together and you have to incubate them and you have to learn faster than the typical university model would let you do. So yeah, it's a famous place, full of great people, but the way back to the business model, right? The business model was no longer effective. And so the company was declining by about 3% per year for 20 years. And it had run out of money. The banks were, if we lost any more money, the loans would have been called and it would have been a disaster for the place. And as I said already, the buildings were about to fall down and they were selling off the land. So this is the funny story. So back to my violin thing. So I come out here and I'm working, 100 hours a week because it's so crazy when I get here. And I come off a red eye and I slip on some sand, and instead of just breaking my collarbone, I ended on the edge of a curb. So it hit at the end of my collarbone and it broke the bone right down the middle. So the bone, I'm told this is very rare. It doesn't happen that way. Usually it just breaks it and they put it back together and you're done. No. So I had to have it all screwed together and have an operation and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So what makes this story interesting is that I have to wait 3 days before I can get into the operating room for them to screw my shoulder back together. Meanwhile, we're having the first offsite with the senior management on the future of SRI. So I don't want to cancel this because it's, I'm in a hurry. We didn't have much time. So we don't cancel the offsite. So I get up to give my little speech and I'm all wrapped up. I'm in pain. I'm on heavy doses of Vicodin. I have no idea.
You haven't slept for days.
Not at all. Not at all. I don't know where I am. So this is a true story. So it'll tell you what the place was like. So I give my welcome talk and a guy stands up, a senior level manager, been there for a long time, a very good scientist, by the way. He stands up and says, "Curt, you seem to think we're going to grow. We're not going to grow. We don't want to grow. We can't grow. You can forget that." Thanks. Thanks. Great feedback. I appreciate the feedback. Okay, next. Another guy stands up. Again, a very famous scientist, terrific guy. He says, Curt, you seem to think we're managers. We're not managers. You should not think about us as managers. We do our bit, you know, it's like a university, we take our turn, but you forget this management stuff. We're not going to do that. You can forget that. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the feedback. And at this point, I'm thinking to myself, it's a good thing I'm on all that Vicodin. That's what it was like. It was, and it's what happens when people are in a dysfunctional setting for 20 years. It gets to be absolutely insane. And it took us about 3 years to turn the place around and start growing. And when I left, we grew the place 3.5 times. And we were creating another multi-billion-dollar business every 3 or 4 years.
Universities usually, the technology transfer usually work on royalty agreements.
Yeah.
And you did it differently?
Well, what we did differently is the way we formed our ventures. So so when I left, we were almost 550, $600 million worth of research a year. And every year we'd incubate a dozen new ventures. And unlike a university, we'd actually incubate them. A university usually doesn't incubate them, and the tech transfer organizations are mostly incompetent. Most of those organizations lose money. I know, be quiet. Yes, I know.
They're watching us.
I know, and they all say they're successful. So here, this is a funny story. So I'm once in England at a tech transfer. Even the name is wrong, tech transfer. That's crazy. That's a stupid idea. I'm at this conference, and the guy from Oxford stands up and he tells the audience what a wonderful program they have at Oxford. Okay. So afterwards, I ran into him. I said, "Are you guys really successful?" And he says, "No." He said, "Do you have a job? I need to get out of here." Most of them lose money. And the reason it's no secret, Mel, it's because you don't take a piece of technology and just throw it over the wall. And turn it into a Siri or high definition television. Somebody's going to do that, sometimes a decades worth of work to turn that raw IP into something of value. And universities are not designed to do that, which is okay. But SRI could be designed to do that. And we did. We took it really seriously, and we had a serious incubation process. And we learned how to incubate, as I said, about a dozen things every year. And we'd spin out 2 or 3, and we were going to do big things. We did some smaller things, obviously, all the time, but every once in a while we did something really big, like Siri or high definition television.
So Curt, you sold Siri to Steve Jobs.
We did.
You met Steve?
I did not personally do the negotiation with Steve Jobs. The CEO of our company did that with Norm Winarski, who ran our ventures group.
And how much is it public knowledge? How much they paid for Siri?
No, we made a lot of money from that, but he made a lot more money.
Exactly.
So it made that.
This is not the first time I have a friend, William, who invented Alexa, and I have a feeling that Amazon made more money than he did. But that's not relevant. You guys made a lot of money.
Oh, it's not relevant. I mean, he brought the power of Apple to it, which is what to get where he ended up would have taken us 10 years, which he did almost immediately. Adam Shire, who was our chief technology officer on that, estimates that Siri added over $50 billion to the value of Apple. Obviously, we didn't make $50 billion.
I have to tell you now a Jewish joke.
Okay, here we go. I knew there'd be at least one. I knew this. Where's the pastrami sandwich? Where's my pastrami sandwich? I want the.
It's actually today is the birthday of my late dad.
Wow.
And I wasn't planning on telling a joke, but finding out that you're almost Jewish and talking about value propositions. So these 2 Jews are talking in New York, and one says to the other, Moshe, what are you doing these days? And Moshe says, I'm selling watches. He says, you're selling watches? How's it going? He said, listen, I have such a great business. I'm not selling my watches for retail. I'm not selling them for wholesale. And you know what? I'm not even selling my watches for cost. I'm selling my watches below cost. He says, Moshe, you're selling your watches below cost. How do you make any money? He says, you know how many watches I sell? So this is a Jewish joke that
it's like Swedish people. So Mel, if that were a perfect joke, let's imagine for a second it was a perfect joke, as opposed to a Swede who was trying to compliment you would say, Mel, it could have been worse. It could have been worse.
You kind of have to be Jewish to understand that joke. So
I know.
It's an acid test.
It's got a perspective to it. That's true.
Yeah.
So I got to tell you a Steve Jobs story though, which is kind of funny.
Okay,
so,
we still have to talk about your law.
We'll get to the law, but let me just finish. I think you'll like this. So we finally formed Siri, and by the way, we gave equity and royalties to our staff. So we made a bunch of millionaires out of Siri at SRI. So that was part of our deal. Is everybody got some, but the team got the bulk of because they're the ones who worked for 10 years to make it happen. And not just the technical people, the whole team shared in a good amount of that. Anyway, so we formed the company and we get the product out. And 2 weeks later, Steve Jobs calls up our CEO and says, hi, this is Steve Jobs. And our CEO says, no, you're not. Puts down the phone. So 30 seconds later, the phone rings again and says, no, this really is Steve Jobs. It really was Steve Jobs. And he took them out to dinner that night, and he said he wanted to buy the company, and we did not want to sell the company, I would tell you at that point. And we were, at a minimum, we wanted to get a bidding war going between Steve Jobs and the other high-tech companies around here. So we called up everybody you can think of, and it's a classic story, Mel. It's like, no, nobody's interested in that. Forget that. No, you can't do that. That's impossible. Oh yeah, well we have this covered. Don't worry. We're not. Blah blah blah. So that's going on one side, and Steve Jobs is sitting in the lobby, trying to buy our company. So that tells you, everything you want to know about Steve Jobs versus most big company senior executives, right? So it took IBM years to finally come out with something that was equivalent, right? It's like, here we're a little SRI, and we're beating all these big guys by years, right? And it's because we were actually collaborating, we were actually working together. We actually had a process to get the answers we needed, and they don't. Most of these big companies don't, not at all. By the way, and you can prove it to yourself. It's so easy. You just walk into any big company and ask a bunch of managers to describe their innovation system, and they'll all give you a different answer. And then ask them really hard questions like, what's the definition for innovation? What's the definition of customer value? What's the definition for a value proposition? Whoa. And you will get answers that are all over the place. And some of them will just be nuts. They'll be crazy. And what that means is they don't even have a common language to talk to each other. And the story of the Tower of Babel comes to mind here. If you're a Tower of Babel and you don't share the one language that you should have in common, which is the language focused on the customer, what does that do to your productivity? Doesn't help. Doesn't help. When everybody's walking around and you say, Mel says value proposition, Curt says value proposition, and you're thinking of something completely different, we're not in alignment. We can't work together efficiently. And that's what for all the audience of this, do those two simple tests. And I think you'll be amazed at what you find. I've yet to walk into a company where I could get answers to those two questions. not one ever. And we've been in kind of a who's who of companies around the world. You name it, we've probably worked in it, right? So yeah, it's amazing to me.
I gave up with companies long ago.
Big companies are tough.
Congratulations to you. So let's go to your law. There's
law.
a law named after you.
There is.
At least one. The one that I know. The one that I know is that bottom-up innovation is chaotic but smart.
Yeah.
And top-down innovation is dumb. Did I get that partly right?
Fast but dumb.
Fast but dumb.
It can be fast. It can be fast, but dumb. Yeah. So the by the way, I didn't make up this law. Tom Friedman.
It's named after you?
Yeah, he's the one. So I said that to him, and he wrote that up in a book that he wrote. There's a whole chapter about what we did this way.
And it was your idea.
Yeah, yeah. So I said it to him. Yeah. So it is my idea, but it's not a really profound idea when you think about it. The principle was that the people who are close to the technology and to the customers are the ones who have the knowledge to be successful innovators. When you're at the top of the organization, and if you design it incorrectly, there are filters between you and the top. So those filters are delays. And if you think about innovation as being a process of learning, creating, searching, and improving fast, it's all about information and gathering it and turning it into new knowledge. And you want to do that as fast as you can, because otherwise you're not competitive. So if you think about it just in terms of information flow, when you put barriers between the information, which is at the bottom, it's not usually at the top. I mean, there is information at the top, but a lot of it comes from the bottom. If you put barriers between them, whether it's horizontal or vertical, then you're slowing yourself down. If you don't have a common language, you're slowing down the communications path. All these things get in the way, and most companies are full of them. I mean, the bureaucracy is all about putting filters between you and the flow of information. And everybody knows this, but everybody still does it, you know? Anyway, so Carlson's law was just a way of saying, if you organize yourself that way, because the world is going faster and faster, if anything, you should be moving the decision point down, not up. So now there are exceptions to that, obviously, but the exceptions are very rare. The Steve Jobs and Musks of the world, and only a few other people who actually deeply embed themselves into the actual technology to be able to be smart enough to do things fast. So it's possible for top-down to work, but it takes a very special person who creates a very special organization.
Yeah, but actually, your law explains my life.
Really?
Because if you're an inventor, chaos is king.
Yes, that's true.
And most people don't understand that.
Well, that's a really profound point, Mel, because they don't understand that there are three kinds of problems to be solved. There are simple ones like cooking a hot dog. So you have a recipe, cook the hot dog. Pretty hard to screw it up. Then there are complicated.
That up.
I know. Yeah, people do, but it's still pretty hard. Then there are complicated problems like building a 100-story building. There's a million things that have to be done, but they can all be done, and there are management tools for doing that. And if you do it well and follow all the laws, you'll have a good building. And then there are complex problems, and big innovations are all complex, like life. Life is complex because things interact in nonlinear ways, and it's all kinds of things pop up. Wars happen, all kinds of things happen that make it complex. And all big innovations are birthed in that kind of ecosystem, a complex one. And so they just don't happen, they emerge. They actually have to zig and zag and figure out these complex ways Just like in life, you zig and you zag, and then hopefully you end up, if you do the right stuff, in a good place. So from our point of view, that zig, well, you want that zigging and zagging to go as fast as you can and as efficiently as you can. And it turns out if you do that and you do the simple principles that we taught everybody, it's amazing. I mean, here's a place that's failing for 20 years, and all of a sudden it's creating another billion-dollar business every 3 or 4 years. Same people. By the way, I had no money to fire people. I had no money. I mean, in the beginning, every nickel had to go into the buildings that are falling down, right? I mean, it's just crazy. By the way, there's one other thing I may end up being known for. Just 4 letters. Yeah, no, Mel, this is actually true.
Okay.
So now this is actually, it turns out to be a very important concept. And it is the definition of what a value proposition is. And we tried everything. By the way, when Norman and I were starting to learn about value creation, thinking of it as a learning science, because that's our whole framework, is it's about learning fast. One of the first questions was, what is a value proposition? So we read every book. I mean, I can't tell you how many books I read because I knew nothing. Working in a big company, they don't teach you anything that's worthwhile. Nothing worked. Nothing worked. So we were meeting with my team every 2 weeks, so from 5 until 9 o'clock at night with pizza and Coke. And we were presenting what we were working on and sharing ideas about what we learned from these different books and from these people. Nothing worked. Nothing. It just made it worse. And we kept on asking, well, what's the definition? What's the most concise definition for a value proposition? And finally, we hit upon just 4 concepts. What's the customer need? Got to start there, right? What's your approach for the offering and the business model? The third one is benefits per cost. Benefits per cost is the definition of value. Benefits per cost, definition of value. And how does that compare to the competition or the alternatives? Need, approach, benefits per cost, and competition. Just 4 questions. So as an academic, you actually have to answer those 4 questions for every paper you write. What's the problem you're trying to solve? What's your working hypothesis for the approach? Why does it matter? And what's the competition doing? So in a way, this shouldn't be remarkable to any academic, but I promise you, if you present this to any of your academic buddies, they'll think you've lost your mind. It's like, oh, Mel's telling us what to do. No, Mel's just suggesting maybe you ought to answer these questions. So we discovered that there was real power if we did 3 things, and only 3 things. I can almost predict any organization that does these 3 things, and only these 3 things, they'll be transformed. One is focus on important problems, not interesting ones. Important, not interesting. So you have to know what that means, but put that aside. The second is the use of this definition for a value proposition to start, because those 4 questions are fundamental. And if you can't answer those 4 fundamental questions, you really don't know what you're doing. And if you believe that innovation is an emergent activity, if you get the fundamentals wrong, you'll be going in the wrong direction. You got to get those fundamentals right, because basically they tell you what direction to go in. So this is basic complexity theory, right? You start out with the fundamental stuff and it tells you which way to go, because you got to zig and you zag to get there.
So what I learned especially now is I'm going to make some notes here because this is so important. I don't usually do this on You've Got Mel. I will usually go have a beer afterwards, but I'm going to take some notes because this is very valuable. But what I've learned, because when I teach, innovators and inventors, they zig and they zag and they zig and they zag, and usually they don't have the information to make a good choice, except in retrospect. If the invention works and you sell it, then all the choices you made along the line were good choices. Well, but on the way, you don't always have the right information.
Well, no, I mean, the goal is to get the information you need. You're absolutely right. That's the problem.
But you're working, sometimes, inventors at least, are working in a void.
All inventors work in a void.
Yeah, But here's the thing, Curt. What you taught me, and this is really important. Too bad I had to wait 69 years. But what you're saying is you have to zig and zag quickly.
Yes.
Now that's really important.
It is. So I want to just, I didn't finish the third point. So important problems, a concise definition for the value proposition. So you're starting in the right direction. And the third thing is what we did was you have to learn, you're not smart enough alone. Mel, you're a super smart guy. I hate to tell you this, no matter what your mother said, all that time you're growing up, I know you're the most brilliant kid that ever came out of your block, but you're not smart enough because all the things that you and I want to work on today are interdisciplinary. Like Siri, there were 10 technologies in Siri. Nobody understands all 10 of those technologies.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And people say to me, Mel, you're really smart. And I'm not really smart. But you know what I am? I'm chaotic.
Well, you're chaotic?
Yes, and that's why I love you and I love your law. Because chaos is king. You don't have to be smart, you have to be chaotic and willing to learn from all these different fields and things that come across your desk.
No, absolutely. No, you have to take advantage of that. And again, so what we did is we would all stand up every 2 to 4 weeks and we'd present a 3 to 5 minute version of our value proposition, just those 4 questions. And there'd be different people in the room. And if we needed, we'd end up in a cul-de-sac, one of those places you just mentioned, and we'd invite people in. We'd invite people like you. Mel, you're an expert on certain kinds of chemical processes in the body. You're a famous guy. We need some help with that. And we'd ask you to come into these meetings. And the teams would be standing up every 4 weeks, presenting their value proposition and trying to zig and zag to get to a reasonable place. And without spending a lot of money, because until you've got a pretty good value proposition, you shouldn't spend a nickel, because as soon as you do, by the way, and this gets to a whole nother topic, which we might discuss in another interview, is people get hooked on a lot of really bad ideas, like the business model canvas is a really terrible idea. It violates everything I know about chaos theory, and I know, everybody's in love with it. It's a terrible way to start. I mean, it's got a dozen really hard questions that all interact with each other. It's like it violates every principle that you ever learned about chaos theory. You don't do it that way. You start with the fundamentals, and eventually it's a checklist. There's nothing wrong with it in concept as a checklist, but as a platform for developing new innovations, it's absolutely a terrible idea. I'll probably get death threats tonight, right? For
highly likely. I'm not going to give your exact address though.
Okay, good.
But we're towards the end, because I want to invite you again. I want to have a look at the interview, because we haven't talked about education. We haven't talked about why universities suck.
Exactly.
Exactly. And we haven't talked about the Beatles.
No, well, you're the expert on that. I can talk about Yasha Heifetz, though, endlessly. Another one of my Jewish heroes, right? There you go, Mel. It comes back to that.
And there was this guy named Albert Einstein who didn't play a bad violin either.
I played on his violin, just so you know.
At Princeton?
It was at a music shop where I was buying a violin, and he said, "Would you like to play on Albert Einstein's violin?" I said, "Would I ever?" How much do I have to pay you to play this? It was a Strad. It was pretty good. It wasn't a great Strad, but it was pretty good.
You played on Albert Einstein's Strad.
I did. I absolutely did. Yes, 100%. Yes, I did.
We should have started with that. I mean,
yeah.
So does that mean that you're not going to? And by the way, I do agree with you that you always need to invoke smarter people. I'm not sure that you always need to work with them, but you do have to have coffee with them.
Well, in my case, not only did I have coffee with them, a lot of pastrami sandwiches, lots of yeah.
No, but I mean, you're a person who changed companies and the world. I didn't. I was like a university professor who played jazz and wrote children's books. It's a whole nother thing. For we can talk about it when you interview me someday.
But just so you know, Mel, I think of all those things as being forms of value creation. So children's books, for example, that's a very creative activity. It's very important. It's fundamental to education. So I actually put most of those things into that category. Then the question is, how do you do it so it's significant? So you really do change lives, right? And I'll just end with this. The reason I now teach is I saw that when people develop these skills, it changed their lives. I mean, in a really profound way. So I'm a guy, I'm an example of it. I'm a guy who failed at everything that he did for the first quarter of his career with all the resources in the world. Nothing was successful. I mean, I wrote papers, I gave talks, I thought I was hot stuff, but the truth was I was doing nothing that mattered. And by learning these other skills, because I hung around with really smart people like my friend Norman, we figured it out, and just about everything that I've wanted to do since has been a success. And I'm the same guy. And it's because we learn these skills, and I've seen what that does for other people too. It's life transforming once you learn these skills. And that's why I teach, and that's how we're trying to change education. It's a big
Wonderful.
deal.
So
It's a big deal.
we're going to have another, if you are willing, we'll have another one, and we'll dedicate it to education.
Perfect.
But I'm giving a talk on science and the Beatles next week.
You are.
Yeah. So for my talk, I need some help. So you must have a favorite Beatles song.
This is a funny thing. I actually never liked the Beatles, Mel. This may be the end of our relationship. I don't know, but they never.
Because you like the Rolling Stones.
They were okay. I mean, I'm remember, I'm in the world of Jascha Heifetz here, so I'm, my superstars are people like that. Itzhak Perlman, Yo-Yo Ma. Those are my heroes.
They're wonderful. And what about the jazz? No jazz for you?
Good jazz. Yeah, there's some kinds of jazz I've always enjoyed, for sure. That's more. I mean, the Beatles are really good. I'm not trying to pick on the Beatles. It's just not. They never were my favorite. I thought they were. If I say this, you're going to hate me. I thought they were a little superficial.
Oh, they were very superficial.
Okay, good.
But so what?
Well, I know that's the point, right? It's their customers love them, so it's.
I'm not sure. I mean, somebody's going to shoot me for saying that some of Mozart is superficial, and people still like Mozart.
Well, there are parts of Mozart that are superficial, but then there are parts of Mozart that are just.
Yeah, no, but okay, but we're getting into a field that I don't know anything about. But
so I'll give you
the best loved Mozart stuff is his least profound.
Yes. So Bill, just on this music note, so here's another. We can discuss this the next time too. My metaphor for what great science teams are like great musicians playing great pieces of music. The kind of intense practice, commitment, doing things that really matter, the level of work, all those things, and the joy that comes when those things come together, that is magic. It's absolute magic. And that has always been my metaphor for what I was hoping to create with our teams at SRI. And every once in a while we did. So that's another great topic because that also leads into education. There you go. And by the way, the Beatles did achieve that, right? We have to give the Beatles that. They did achieve that.
Achieve what?
That kind of magic that comes from putting together an amazing group.
Yeah, in their early years, they were very much together.
Yeah.
And then they fell apart, which is something we can talk about next time.
Okay.
This has been remarkable, and all I can say is all you need is love.
All you need is love, Mel. And by the way, and that's another interesting topic we could discuss, which is human values. Very important.
Maybe you and I should have a show.
Well, yeah, the Mel and Curt show. That would be great. I think we're having one right now, Mel. I think we're.
I'm trying to interview you here.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Yeah.
It's been incredible.
This has been fun. You're a great guy. It's been great fun. Thank you. And we'll continue.
You're a great guy who changed the world. That's a big difference, you know.
It's the teams again. Don't think of me. Think of the people that we worked with.
Kurt, if I want to think of you, I'll think of you.
Okay.
You know, to quote a musical. So what can you do me?
Yeah, there you go.
Do me. What can you do me? I've kind of fallen in love with you. Can't wait to meet you next time I'm in your vicinity, and can't wait to host you in the Holy Land.
I would love to be there with you. I'm sure we'd have a great time. Okay. Thanks, Mel.
Again.
Be good.
Thanks for getting up early.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thank you for being on You've Got Mel.
It's been great, Mel. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Take care.